Picture this. It's the dead of winter in medieval Scandinavia, and Jack Frost isn't just nipping at your nose, he's trying to turn your entire body into a human popsicle. While we're over here cranking up the thermostat when it hits 68 degrees Fahrenheit, Vikings were out there laughing in the face of temperatures that regularly hovered between 14 degrees Fahrenheit to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, with brutal cold snaps that could plummet even lower. When winter hit the Viking world, it wasn't just cold, it was the kind of cold that makes your breath freeze midair and fall to the ground with a little tink sound. Even at these temperatures, that's cold enough to freeze ale solid, which for a Viking was basically the apocalypse. But here's the thing about Vikings. They didn't just survive these frozen hellscapes. They absolutely dominated them. These weren't your typical medieval peasants huddling in corners praying for spring. These were the people who looked at a frozen fjord and said, "You know what? Perfect weather for a sea voyage to England." Forget everything you think you know about medieval bedding. While other Europeans were tossing and turning on scratchy straw mattresses, Vikings had turned sleeping into a tactical operation. Archaeological excavations in Norway and Iceland reveal that Vikings slept on wooden benches built along the walls of their longhouses, creating sleeping arrangements that were brilliantly practical for winter survival. Vikings didn't mess around with thin straw beds scattered on cold floors. They built raised wooden sleeping benches that lifted them off the ground entirely. Why? Because cold air sinks, and Vikings weren't about to let physics win this battle. These benches were then loaded with layers upon layers of the finest materials they could raid, trade, or hunt for. The base layer was always sheepskins, sometimes up to 8 thick, followed by wolf pelts, bear furs, and if you were particularly successful in your raiding career, maybe some exotic furs from far-off lands. One archaeological site in Iceland revealed a sleeping area with remnants of seal, reindeer, and even walrus hide. Talk about a luxury suite, Viking style. But the real genius was in their communal sleeping strategy. Vikings didn't believe in everyone gets their own bed nonsense. Extended families would sleep together on these benches, with the warmest spots naturally going to the most important family members or those who needed protection from the cold most. The sagas tell us about the close-knit nature of these living arrangements, where staying warm was a family affair that required everyone to work together. While medieval peasants were wrapping themselves in whatever scraps they could find, Vikings approached winter clothing like they were suiting up for battle, because essentially, they were. Archaeological textile finds show that Viking winter clothing was expertly crafted and perfectly suited to their harsh environment. The Viking layering system was legendary. They started with a base layer of fine linen. Yes, linen, even in winter, because it wicked moisture away from the skin better than wool. Over that went a wool undertunic, then carefully woven woolen outer tunics that provided both warmth and durability, followed by a leather jerkin when needed for extra protection. But here's where Vikings separated themselves from the pack. They had figured out the secret of fur integration. While others were just throwing animal skins over their shoulders, Vikings were creating sophisticated fur-lined garments with actual tailoring. They'd line the inside of their cloaks with fox fur, trim their hoods with wolf fur, and create fur-lined boots that were so effective, some designs are still used by Arctic explorers today. The outer layer was their masterpiece, thick woolen cloaks that were often waterproofed with a mixture of beeswax and pine tar. These cloaks were huge, sometimes measuring 10 feet across, and could double as emergency shelter when needed. Vikings could literally wrap themselves into a human burrito and sleep outdoors in a snowstorm if necessary. And the accessories? Vikings invented the concept of tactical winter gear. Their mittens weren't just mittens, they were leather gauntlets with detachable finger sections so they could quickly switch from keeping warm to gripping weapons. Their boots were engineering marvels with multiple layers, waterproof sealing, and traction systems made from carved bone or metal studs. While medieval peasants were fumbling around with smoky fire pits that barely heated their hovels, Vikings had turned fire-making into an art form. Archaeological evidence from Viking longhouses shows heating systems that were centuries ahead of their time. The centerpiece of Viking fire technology was the long hearth, a stone-lined fire trench that ran down the center of their halls. sometimes stretching 30 feet or more. But this wasn't just a bigger campfire, it was a sophisticated heat distribution system. The stones were carefully selected for their heat retention properties and arranged to radiate warmth long after the flames died down. Vikings had mastered the art of fuel efficiency in ways that would impress anyone. They didn't burn random junk like their southern neighbors. Instead, they had developed a complex fuel hierarchy. Birch bark for kindling. It burns even when wet. Pine for quick heat, oak for long-burning coals, and juniper for its aromatic properties that helped mask the smell of, well, a bunch of Vikings living in close quarters. But the real Viking innovation was their understanding of heat retention. They would heat stones in their fires during the day, creating thermal mass that would continue radiating warmth through the night. The central hearth design meant that heat could warm the entire length of the longhouse efficiently. Vikings also pioneered the concept of the firekeeper, usually an older family member whose job was to maintain the perfect fire all winter long. This wasn't just about keeping warm, it was about survival. A dead fire in a Viking longhouse during a blizzard meant everyone was in serious trouble. Firekeepers developed almost supernatural abilities to predict how long different fuel combinations would burn and could keep a fire going with minimal fuel during resource shortages. While other medieval folks were playing Guess What's in the Mystery Stew, Vikings had turned winter food storage and preparation into a military operation. Archaeological digs at Viking settlements reveal food preservation techniques that were so advanced some are still used in Scandinavia today. The foundation of Viking winter cuisine was their incredible fish preservation skills. They didn't just catch fish, they created fish fortresses. Using techniques passed down through generations, Vikings could preserve cod, herring, and salmon to last not just through winter but for years if needed. They developed different preservation methods for different fish types: wind drying for cod, creating what we now call stockfish, smoking for salmon, and fermentation for smaller fish. But Vikings weren't just fish eaters. They had mastered the art of preserving everything from whale meat to reindeer. Their smoking houses were architectural marvels, multi-story structures where different levels maintained different temperatures and smoke densities for optimal preservation of various meats. The bottom level was for initial heavy smoking, middle levels for slower curing, and top levels for final drying. The Viking winter stew game was next level. While peasants were throwing random vegetables into a pot and hoping for the best, Vikings were creating carefully balanced meals that provided optimal nutrition for surviving Arctic conditions. Their stews included preserved fish, dried berries rich in vitamin C, fermented vegetables for probiotics, and a variety of herbs that had both nutritional and medicinal properties. One of their most genius innovations was concentrated travel provisions, high-energy foods that could be carried on winter expeditions. They created dried meat and fat mixtures, what we might recognize as an early form of pemmican, fruit leather packed with nuts and honey, and concentrated fish preparations that provided essential nutrients during long cold weather journeys. Here's where Vikings really showed their tactical brilliance. They didn't just share their homes with animals during winter, they turned their livestock into a practical heating solution. Archaeological evidence from Viking farmsteads shows animal housing arrangements that made perfect sense for surviving brutal winters. Vikings understood that animals generate significant body heat and arranged their longhouses to take advantage of this natural warmth. Cattle were often housed in sections of the longhouse where their presence could help warm the main living areas. Sheep were kept in areas where their body heat could benefit sleeping spaces, and horses, too valuable to risk losing to the cold, were brought inside during the worst weather. But the Vikings took this concept further than anyone else. They developed flexible living arrangements where animals could be brought into different areas of the longhouse based on weather conditions and practical needs. During the worst storms, they would bring their most valuable animals directly into the main hall. Not just for warmth, but because these animals represented wealth that couldn't be risked. The genius was in the architectural design. Viking longhouses included areas that could accommodate both people and animals, with practical solutions for managing the challenges of shared winter living. The entire structure was designed to be adaptable to the harsh realities of Scandinavian winters. While medieval peasants were digging holes in the ground and hoping for the best, Vikings were constructing winter fortresses that combined architectural innovation with military strategy. Archaeological studies of Viking winter settlements reveal building techniques that were centuries ahead of their time. The foundation of Viking winter architecture was their understanding of wind patterns and snow dynamics. They didn't just build houses, they built winter combat systems. Viking longhouses were positioned to deflect prevailing winds, with the main entrance placed in wind shadows created by natural terrain features or specially constructed windbreaks. The walls themselves were masterpieces of insulation engineering. Vikings used a technique called double wall construction, where they built two walls with an air gap between them, then filled that gap with a mixture of moss, animal hair, and clay. This created insulation values that wouldn't be matched in European construction for another 500 years. But the real innovation was their practical design approach. Viking longhouses were built to accommodate extended families of varying sizes, with flexible spaces that could be adapted as needed. The structures were designed with winter survival in mind, featuring thick walls, strategic placement of doors and windows, and efficient use of available building materials. The roofing system was particularly brilliant. Vikings used a layered approach with birch bark as the waterproof base layer, then thick sod for insulation, all held together with a wooden framework that could flex with wind and snow loads without breaking. Some of these roofs were so well constructed that grass and small trees would grow on them, creating additional insulation and camouflage. Vikings didn't just own winter tools, they crafted survival systems that could mean the difference between conquering winter and becoming its victim. Archaeological finds from Viking sites reveal toolkits that were so advanced, modern survival experts study them for insights. The centerpiece of any Viking winter toolkit wasn't a shovel. It was a multi-purpose tool they called a winter axe. This wasn't your typical chopping tool, it was a carefully balanced instrument that could cut wood, break ice, dig through snow, and serve as a weapon if necessary. The best winter axes were family heirlooms passed down through generations and worth more than most people's entire possessions. Vikings had also perfected the art of ice navigation tools. They created specialized ice picks for testing ice thickness, ice anchors for securing boats in frozen harbors, and even ice shoes. Early versions of crampons made from bone and metal that allowed them to traverse frozen landscapes that would stop other travelers cold. But the most impressive aspect of Viking winter survival was their rope and binding technology. They created specialized winter ropes from walrus hide and whale sinew that remained flexible even at extreme temperatures. These ropes were used for everything from securing loads during winter travel to creating emergency shelters to rescue operations when someone fell through ice. Vikings also developed what might be the world's first winter emergency kits. Every Viking traveler carried a small leather pouch containing fire-starting materials that would work in any weather, including a special tinder made from birch fungus that could catch spark even when wet, emergency food supplies, and a small knife designed specifically for winter survival tasks. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Viking winter survival wasn't their technology or techniques. It was their cultural approach to surviving months of darkness and brutal cold. While winter challenged other cultures, Vikings turned the season into an opportunity for community building, storytelling, and skill development. Vikings developed strong cultural traditions around winter gatherings. The concept of hall culture wasn't just about having a place to gather, it was about creating an environment where people could maintain their social bonds during the darkest times of the year. Their evening gatherings included storytelling, riddle contests, and skill-sharing sessions that kept minds sharp and communities strong. They also understood the importance of light during dark winters. Vikings were among the first to develop efficient oil lamps and candle systems that could provide consistent light throughout the winter months. They used whale oil, seal oil, and specially prepared fish oils to create lighting systems that burned cleanly and provided warmth as well as illumination. The result? While other medieval populations saw winter as a time of mere survival, Vikings saw it as preparation season. They used winter months for weapon crafting, boat building, strategy planning, and skill development. When spring came, they weren't weakened by winter. They were stronger, better organized, and ready to launch the raiding season that would make them legendary. This is how the Vikings didn't just survive winter. They conquered it. They turned the season that broke other civilizations into their secret weapon, emerging from each winter stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than before. No wonder they became the stuff of legends.